So, Jessica, we have to start off with this news. Magic Johnson now is an investor in the NWSL in the Washington Spirit.
I think it deserves a round of applause.
That deserves a round of applause.
That was announced this morning that Magic Johnson has joined Michelle Kang as an investor in the Washington Spirit, following an incredible list of investors, celebrities, athletes, and business people who are investing in the NWSL.
Yeah, Midge, first impressions of having someone like him in this status of the athlete investor. Really, he really started this off, being in the league.
Yeah, it's not my club, so I can't really. They're my business.
In the context of the discussion that we just had, Grant Hill is an investor in Orlando as well, and he's incredible. And we actually can't talk about news without mentioning that Bob Iger and Willow Bay were announced today as the new control owners of Angel City.
For a record-breaking valuation of $250 million.
Correct.
Which we will get into later, but that's, this is why we're here, right? To talk about this incredible time for women's soccer and these record-breaking numbers that we keep seeing. So I want to start off by talking about the collective bargaining agreement that has now, broke the news in the last couple of weeks. Can you hit some highlights for us, Jessica, on maybe for some people who haven't heard how historic this has been?
Yeah, I think there's really, three reasons that this is historic. I'll save what has gotten the headlines for last. I think the first piece that's historic, and maybe it's just me because I'm a labor lawyer, and I've negotiated collective bargaining agreements my entire career in professional sports and outside of professional sports, is that it's quite unique to have a relationship with your players' association where you can decide proactively to come to the table and negotiate an extension through what was, when we started, 3 years before the expiration. It really is a signal, and should be a signal, to the marketplace, sponsors, media partners, and investors that we have the kind of partnership where we can really imagine the future of this league together. By the way, we disagree on plenty of things, but we can at least have the discussion to say, is there a world that we can build together that will make this wholesale different than the history of women's sports has been? And that's what we did last summer. We actually sent a letter to the union and said, we invite you to the table to have a confidential discussion about what could be. Let's reimagine the future. And if it doesn't work out, we can both decide to walk away and wait till the CBA is expiring, like most professional sports leagues do, to re-engage in a negotiation. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that really from our owner's perspective, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be leading the league, although I come from men's sports and we can take from the men's sports leagues what has worked historically, we also can be innovative and think differently about what the future holds for our sport, taking into account the unique interests and goals and objectives and challenges that female athletes have, and decide what does not work for us, what does not serve us. And we decided in this instance, and this sort of leads to the third piece, which is that we decided, and it really is a big deal since, again, I come from my entire career working on behalf of leagues and management in sports, in the fact that we decided to eliminate the draft and have all players who, when they are out of contract, be free agents and have the power to decide where they play. And that is really a fundamental difference from a North American league perspective, but it is not different from how the rest of the world operates. And that's really the recognition by our ownership group that we compete in a global labor market for talent, and we want to remove the self-imposed obstacles that would stand in the way of us attracting the best players in the world. We have a vision that our board has endorsed and really empowered me to effectuate and manifest to be the best league in the world, and you need to have the best players to be the best league in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen a lot of that now. Obviously, the Olympics had the most NWSL players ever. Midge, I know this was really important for the players to get to this place of being on the same level with free agency and signing of the global standard for football and soccer. You have this new show coming out called The Offseason, which we're getting into later. I'm so excited to talk about it. It's this mix between Vanderpump Rules and sports documentary. It's going to be amazing. But in that show, you really talk about these moments, these real moments that happen to athletes, being traded, how it affects you. Can you break us down for that a little bit, what it feels like to be on that side?
It doesn't feel good. No, so this is the trailer actually for the off season. That's me, upset, sad. One of the moments that don't feel so great. But we had a player who got traded in the house during the offseason. And, it gave this lens to what it's actually truly like to be a professional athlete behind the scenes, not on the field, when you take away all of the normal, typical cameras that we have on us when we step on the field when we're training, and you actually pull back and you say, okay, what is it like in 2024 to be a professional female athlete? And we have people dealing with contract negotiations. I myself was deciding whether or not I was going to go to a new team or I was going to wait to enter free agency. Turns out we're all going to get it, so it's great. But there I am, very upset about it. But it's hard, it's difficult. These are things that are part of the industry, the business of sport, and that's a reality that you have to accept no matter what. You're still going to have contract negotiations. You're still going to get traded. You may not like your coach. Things like that are going to happen. But I think the transition and the steps that the league has taken to mitigate some of the unnecessary issues and challenges with being a professional athlete, I think that's huge, and it's a big win for us players as well.
Yeah, when you reflect on that moment, how empowering it's going to be having a say of where you go, if you go, how empowering is that to take back that control, do you think?
I don't know if I can express how important it is. And I say this not just from a player perspective, but as someone who has watched the culture of women's sports be extremely paternalistic to women and control their movements in ways that have not been appropriate in any industry or business. So I think that this is really monumental, not just in the business of it, but in the culture that we have in the United States for women in sport, in business, and society.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And yes,
yeah,
clap it up. Yeah, give it up. It's really powerful the way you phrase that. And Jessica, you had mentioned it. You come from men's sports. You spent a lot of time at the NHL. Has anyone ever reached out to you after this news broke? I mean, obviously, like Midge had alluded to, the draft is really a revenue generator for some leagues. I mean, the NFL's not abolishing the draft, right? It's a huge moneymaker for them. But someone like the NHL or the MLB or some other teams, some other leagues, could you imagine this expanding into other parts of American sports?
I think there's a few things that made our decision more obvious that may or may not be relevant to the unique challenges of any individual sport. And I do think this is like a very specific analysis that has to take into account the culture of the game more broadly, but also like your unique challenges for your players. So the short answer is I don't know. There's really two things that for us were meaningfully different. The first is that if you look at the NFL or the NBA and you balance the trade-offs and the opportunities that it creates, those leagues have historically benefited from someone else investing in your player development pathway. They are able to put the wrapper on top of the draft that someone else is funding and celebrate all these players who become stars during their years of college. And so coming into the draft, everybody's like, who those players are, because there is an entire monetization and marketing engine behind the NCAA for men's football and men's basketball. We don't have that in soccer. So in the risk-reward analysis of those obstacles that we imposed on ourselves, possibly in some sports for good reason, it makes the weighing of the pros and cons a lot easier because our players come from everywhere. And it's a whole other topic of conversation why the college system doesn't actually serve us the way it needs to. And certainly, it's fair to say, regardless of what you think of the player pathway in the NCAA for women's soccer, no one knows who those players are because there isn't a big monetization or marketing engine behind them. So that made it unique. I think it's also true to say, and if you look at the history of women's soccer, I often say when you close your eyes and think of greatness in this room as Americans who love sports and soccer, you would think of women first. And that is such a unique first mover advantage for us as we think about the growth of women's sports. It is also true that the rest of the world has woken up to soccer, women's soccer in particular, and we have competitors globally. And that requires a different level of innovation and thoughtfulness around the mechanisms by which we will be in a position to attract the top talent. And so we had to look in the mirror and ask ourselves some really tough questions about that again, I think make our decision makes sense for us. And I think the third piece, which Midge alluded to, is that I do think for women it is different. It's this idea that, you know, we've grown up, and certainly I have, not to the same, through the same lens as an athlete, but grown up in a world where this is a society and a contract that was built for men. Our league, business environments, candidly, like even as a mom with a kid in school, when they're scheduling parent-teacher conferences, it was all built for men, or with the idea that a woman could pick up the pieces during the day because we don't work. And we have to disrupt that if we want for our sport to be able to be the actual best league in the world, not the best women's league, not the best soccer league, but literally the best league in the world. And we think we can actually do that. We just have to think a little bit differently about how we get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Midge, when you're talking about this system and how to grow stars, you know, beyond the U.S. Women's National Team, that's a lot of what your show does, right? You're taking NWSL stars that aren't on the U.S. Women's National Team, other than yourself, you know, that you really wanted to showcase their stories. I mean, that says a lot. You know, why did you pick them specifically, and what else can we do to make sure that people know these players who are stars in this league that aren't on the U.S. national team?
Yeah, I'll answer that backwards. I think what we can do is reform the way industry approaches women's sports. And I think that the CBA is a big example of that, because the biggest problem is that everything has been extremely derivative of men's sports. It's been extremely derivative of the European model and what they do with clubs there. I mean, I'm in New York, New Jersey, and people call my jersey a kit. And I'm like, it's a jersey. This is the U.S. Yeah. So I think just like reframing and reshaping the way and the lens in which we view female athletes as its own original product and content machine would go a long way. And then in terms of just, do you mean like selecting the actual players who are in the house?
Yeah, I mean that. I mean, I'm assuming some of them are your friends, some of them.
Yeah, most of them are my friends.
Yeah.
I have played for a couple of clubs in the league, and so I've had the pleasure of just meeting a lot of women who play in this league, and it is honestly, it's unreal how many stars we have that people just don't know about. And I say stars in the sense where they're not just elite, high-level athletes who perform on the field extremely well week in and week out, but they have these stories that if anyone heard them, you would be in awe, and you would be so curious and bought into knowing what happens next in that story. Also, their personalities are just like, they just sell. And I'm just like, these brands, they don't see them. They don't see how authentically their stories, their brands, their personalities relate to different products, and how it would be so easy to sell anything through the smorgasbord, for lack of a better word, of women that you have here. So, I mean, some of them I knew a lot better than others. Some of them, they're like, hey, invite her, she's good. And then, like in the case of Maria Sanchez, I just thought she was so good. And I was like, I really want to train with her. And so I think you'll see on the show that it really is an authentic way that we're all united, in the sense where it's like, it's 2 weeks before preseason. That is a really, really critical time in your off season, because you're about to enter this time where you're going to be evaluated, and they're going to decide whether or not you're going to be a starter, you're going to be a non-starter, what's your position on the team. You have to come in no matter what kind of year you had before, and you have to prove yourself again. So everyone is super, super focused, but at the same time, it's this time of the year where you're like, this is my last hurrah. We're in Miami. Let's have a little fun, girls, before it's time to go back into the season. So it's really, really cool to see these elite athletes go on the field, truly try to just destroy each other and be so focused, so hyper intensive, and then let loose in the house. And then you go into the actual season and you see them competing against each other, and there's so much context and narrative that's put on every play. I had one of the editors call me because two of the women got into a fight in the house. You'll see if you watch.
You guys gotta watch the show. I've never been so hyped off a trailer before, I swear.
Yeah, I brought the my team won the NWSL championship last year, and my club was gracious enough, and the league was gracious enough to let me bring it to the house, and that obviously upset a lot of people.
The trophy, you mean?
The trophy, yeah. I put it on a pedestal in the front.
Made by Tiffany.
Made by Tiffany, and it caused a lot of problems, but episode 5.
Gotta let them know.
But when there's a tackle that happened during the season, and all the producers and the crew, they said, we know exactly why that tackle happened. They were able to contextualize things that were happening on the field, and that's something that really hasn't been done before in women's sports, to put this outside narrative on something that's happening in the field. And I'm just so excited to support the league through this different type of media activation.
Yeah, I'm beyond excited. I know when we talked before, I played soccer in college, and it took me right back to that place, right back to preseason. Obviously, not a lot of people have that experience, so it's almost giving people this look into what it's like, to compete with your friends. I mean, on a college team, you're competing together. Like, you want to be friends. My best friend is the other goalkeeper that was on my team.
Yeah.
But, only one of us got to play, So I just love the idea of showing that. I know when you talked to Jason and Alex on the deal, you had mentioned that when you started shopping this around, that people wanted to make it something that it wasn't. They wanted to make it about female friendship and whatever, and you wanted to show that, no, these are very intense women going to play a very intense sport, best in the world, right? Why was it so intentional for you to find a partner that understood, but you ended up producing yourself, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't find that partner. Oh my gosh, that process was so laborious and frustrating, because when we've been talking about the lens in which women are viewed and expectations and their roles in society, and I was in disbelief that in the year 2024 I could present you high-level athletes who I have players who were in the Olympics, who were at the World Cup, and you look at me and you stare at me in my eye and you tell me that the reason they're in the house needs to be friendship. It's not because they're just elite competitors and trying to win a championship. I was truly in disbelief. It was extremely disheartening, and it was just further evidence that we still are viewing the women's sports industry, the model, as this different kind of subsidiary of men's sports, and that the role it has in the sports landscape is nowhere close to how they view the men's. And so I remember my investor is Alexis Ohanian, and I said to him, I'm not going to produce it if you take one of these networks. I'm out. I will not put my friends and subject them to any storylines that are not authentic to what it's actually like to be a female athlete. And he was like, I don't know why you're getting all crazy. I'm not gonna. He was like, I know, I agree. And so we self-produced, and it was the most amazing process. I learned so much about other players that I had no idea about, their stories and storylines, and I was like, they're bigger stories than I could have even fathomed.
Absolutely. Do we have a premiere date?
We do, and so it's so funny. I told Vanessa on the call, I was like, we can announce the premiere date, and then I went back to Twitter, and they're like, please don't do that yet.
Come on, Twitter.
I can't tell you, but I can tell it's coming soon. It's coming within the next 50 days.
Count that down, everyone.
Count down.
Do the math. Jessica, I know this was produced completely separate from the NWSL, but when we're talking about storytelling there and how important that is for women's sports in general, what are your thoughts on that and how it can propel the league forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge priority for us. We know that original content has served to catalyze the incredible growth of fandom, to both attract new fans as well as to move fans along on the journey to become less casual and more avid, and that's the way we're going to grow our business. Fortunately, we have these incredible media partners in CBS, Amazon, ION, and ESPN, and many of them are doing a ton of original content right now. I'll just give an example. On Scripps ION, they do an incredible focus feature story between every match on Saturday night. So they do a doubleheader every single Saturday, and between they select a deep dive story, and they're incredible. I totally agree with Midge. The stories are absolutely incredible. These women are so inspirational and relatable, and just listen to her. She's the way that they are, the sophistication with which they approach their careers on and off the pitch, how much they know, some of which is because they've had to educate themselves. And I hope we can hold on to the incredibleness of the culture of these athletes when this league is $1 billion valuation, because I do believe that a lot of what has driven the initiative and self-starter ways that these players tell stories and have their own social, and they're just like scrappy because they had to be. And it is serving us well, and I hope we can hold on to some of that as we continue to grow, because it is the unique value proposition we offer the marketplace that makes us differentiated from the men's sports. And yeah, we've just scratched the surface on the stories that we're going to tell. We have some exciting news, but we're not breaking it today. But
nobody wants to break news.
We are
on
working
stage.
on some very exciting original content that the league is developing that will be in market, and it's going to really help people to really, pick up the hood, understand more about our game, our players, our storylines off the pitch, but as importantly on the pitch. Mm-hmm. I often juxtapose the challenges between men's sports and women's sports because I lived NFL, NBA, NHL world, and we were always trying to tell stories about who they are as people, mm-hmm. because all anybody wanted to talk about was the highlights. Mm-hmm. In women's sports, I find that everyone wants to talk about like friendships and like, oh, she's a mom. And all that's like really great, and I understand the point, I do, but I want them to be as excited to talk about literally like the rivalries, the stories about the player and how incredible she is. And by the way, cover the fact that these athletes are not diving and like they get tackled and they get right up and start running. And like you bring any group of people who are men's soccer fans from Europe who are like avid soccer fans at the core and heart of the technical respect for the game, and they come and watch an NWSL game and they're like, that's the best soccer I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. And so you just have to like really get over these biases that are just unfortunately like deep rooted about like, yeah, these women are incredible and they are the best soccer players in the world.
I swear, I mean, I love soccer, but I can't watch men's soccer because of how much they just fall. And I can't even deal with it, and women are way tougher, and it's just obviously proven. Jessica, when we're talking about, you talked about your broadcast partners there, one of the reasons why the CBA was negotiated early, and I'm sure there was a myriad of reasons, but one of the reasons was because you wanted to get ahead of the media deal expiring to negotiate the next one without the CBA weighing over the head of it. Why was that important for you to do for the league?
Yeah, it's the thing that people only worry about when it's a problem, but thankfully it's my job to worry about when it's not a problem. And one of the main catalysts, in addition to all the other circumstantial reasons about the global growth of the game, last year when we invited the union to the table, was knowing that we needed to achieve a long-term CBA, knowing that women's sports and women's soccer in particular were at this transformational moment, and we need to take away every single reason, in addition on the player side, but also on the business side, for anyone to question whether we have the durability and the commercial viability to invest the kind of resources that are necessary to take this league to the next level. We intentionally signed our new media deals. This is the first year of a 4-year deal, 2024, that will run through 2027. And we did it short because we decided to bet on ourselves. Our CBA would have otherwise expired in 2026. I didn't like that proximity. I wanted to be able to go to market, which we're already planning for, and thinking about how we can stepwise change the investment that we can get into this league so that we can have better broadcasts, have better referees, pay our players more. Our new CBA has revenue sharing. We're providing, I think, unprecedented on a global scale, resources and tools and support for our players' unique needs, including the moms in our league, including the players who are in need of support around mental health, including particular focus on medical treatment that is for women specifically. And in order to do all those things, as we say, once we made the decision that we're going to treat this like a business and not a charity, we got to grow our revenues. And we want this to be something that we can look back on in 50 years and know that it is here and still growing and healthy and viable. And that is the commitment that I think everybody in our ecosystem is really holding hands and recognizing. And so when we go to market in 2027 or for the expiration in 2027, they will know that we have a deal through 2030. And that should give everyone a lot of comfort about the long-term viability and stability of the league.
It's going to be great. I can't wait for it. I could literally sit here and talk to you guys all day, but our time is out. Thank you guys so much, Jessica and Midge, for being here with us.